Hi Suresh, how are you?
Hey Piyush, I'm good. How are you?
Good, doing good. You remember the other day we had this interesting conversation about increasing levels of anger and violence in society? At least, like, there is a perception like that. Do you think, like, are we actually witnessing a culture that excessively glorifies and ignites anger, or it's just a perception?
That's a great question. And before I share my perspectives on that, let me bring up a few statistics here. I was reading about this study done in 2008 in Europe, US, and Brazil, which found that an overwhelming majority, almost 85% employees at all levels, experience conflict to some degree. And it was also found that US employees spend 2.8 hours per week dealing with conflict situations. And that equates to approximately 359 or so billion dollars.
$359 billion.
Yes.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, quite a staggering amount there. In paid hours in 2008.
Okay.
Also, as per the study, 25% of the respondents agreed that avoidance of conflict resulted in sickness or absence from work.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this results in wasted employee time, mistakes, stress, obviously lower morale, poor productivity, and no doubt impacts the profits and even the service quality as well.
There was a study which was done by Indian Medical Association. They revealed that over 75% of doctors in India have faced some form of violence at work.
Okay.
And according to this report, and it was published in Times of India, maximum violence is faced by doctors when providing emergency services.
That's the worst time to be facing this.
Exactly. And almost around 50% of such incidents reported were from the ICUs.
Okay, that's so scary.
Yeah. Or, it even included when people are undergoing surgery. So just imagine the stress level at that time.
Absolutely.
And you are getting into this aggression kind of a situation.
Yeah. Well, it is true that in many of our societies there is a certain celebration almost of aggression, masculinity, and that so-called all-powerful macho image. Intercultural management experts, for instance, extensively talk about masculinity index being high in several parts of the world, including some of our Asian and even Western societies. Interestingly, India scores slightly lesser than countries like US, UK, Mexico, and Germany.
That's surprising, actually.
Yes, whereas the general perception is we are a very rambunctious group of people. You see this happening in attitudes related to day-to-day life also. For instance, even something like raising voice or even shouting to display a very tough, no-nonsense approach is believed by many people to bring results. It's seen as a way to get things done. And even in our organizations, it is not rare to find people who genuinely believe that if you want to get results, you will need to shout and show them their place. Yeah, and maybe threaten, cajole, and get them to conform.
You see it on roads, you see it in legislature bodies, on TV studios,
True.
Educational institution, and even in our homes.
Absolutely.
Like we do that with our family members.
Absolutely.
So the fighting spirit, I guess, in society is seen as a very critical thing, and it's not just achievement but even for survival.
Well, then there's also this issue of expectations and standards. We like to believe and celebrate our high and exacting standards. Anything that doesn't cut it, any deviation from the norm must be called out because we want these standards to be met.
Like sometimes on the name of discipline.
So discipline, for instance, is seen as essential. Many of us have grown up hearing this maxim, spare the rod and spoil the child.
Right.
And we want the message to go out in very clear, no uncertain terms, that there is no tolerance to mediocrity.
You want to be seen as a go-getter.
That is celebrated. So this is the other aspect also that we need to be cognizant of. And talk about grabbing eyeballs and getting coverage in our daily lives. We like to claim that we are in this always on 24/7 mode in the 21st century. In the midst of all this din, how do you make yourself heard? Unfortunately, anger is seen as a quick and quote unquote effective route to get noticed and thereby achieve the results that we want. Self-image. We all want to project a certain image of ourselves to others, to the outside world. For instance, everybody knows that being assertive is a good thing.
Right.
It is of course great to be more assertive, no doubt. We want to safeguard our interests, and also we don't like it really when people take us for granted.
Right. And especially if you are a leadership position.
You want to be seen as in command, being in command. Certainly not a good idea to let your guard down. So let me choose to be assertive. But remember, there is a thin line between aggression and assertiveness. And many a times we may just overreach ourselves. Maybe by taking an extremely rigid stance or being overly critical and nitpicking or refusing to show flexibility. There are of course numerous ways we can do it and numerous ways we can overdo it. And before we know it, we have already crossed over to aggression.
So, continuing on the self-image part which you just started, many of us like to show a picture of perfection to the outside world.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, probably that's one easy way out to hide or deny our weaknesses. It is also easy to put the blame on others. It's like, it's not me, it's them.
Right.
And you may be able to pull it off pretty well for a long time indeed.
Right.
We see that a lot of people with power who know they are not going to be challenged that easily.
Absolutely. But that's not the end of the story, isn't it?
Right.
There is a price to be paid for this, what I call a charade of inauthenticity. If you look at it, the core issue here is lack of self-awareness. It often leads to low tolerance and patience levels, as we are not willing to acknowledge our own weaknesses, shortcomings, or even lack of competence, skills. It is very tempting to focus on other people's mistakes and faults, simply because our gaze is seldom turned inward.
So there is hardly any time to do self-awareness.
So it is built into the process that when you are wanting to safeguard yourself with this charade of inauthenticity, the easy way out is to focus on the faults of others. And the more you do that, you are getting lesser time to focus on yourself.
This can actually worsen the problem, right?
It can really worsen the problem and lead to a spiral of frustration and anger. And everyone around gets impacted eventually. Because there is this rather delusive self-righteousness that you are carrying with you. And that has become a shield for many of us. And because this shield is only serving the purpose of a shield, very often you will not be able to get to proper creative resolution of the underlying issues. And when those underlying issues are left unaddressed, this shield is not going to provide much succor. Our focus is on deflection, digression, and even if we don't acknowledge or realize it. In my opinion, this leads to a very sorry state of half-baked perspectives of situations, because many of us are unable to see the various dimensions of the situation, because we are busy caught up with this image, the trap of this image. And especially when things are not going well, we tend to lose out even more, because we are starting off with that disadvantage of a half-baked perspective.
It's as if I have the answers,
Yeah,
and other answers don't come. So even when something goes wrong, it's all about them,
Yeah.
the others.
yeah,
If they behave properly,
Yeah.
things are okay.
right.
Why do they create this situation? Why don't they just get it?
Yeah, indeed.
If people can take care of their responsibilities,
Yeah,
I'll not need to become angry like this.
right. Yeah.
That's how we feel, right?
Yes, yes. So unfortunately, we cover our imperfections and pretensions behind this nice thick wall of aggression and anger. And once I become angry and aggressive, I think I may get away with it. My imperfections may not get that airtime. So it suits me to put on this act of anger and aggression. And very soon it becomes an innate habit for me, almost. So instead of fixing the issues, we are now living in denial, obfuscation of various sorts.
It's something like what happens on our busy roads every day. Even if you have made a mistake while driving,
Yeah,
as soon as something goes wrong, your first reaction would be just pounce on the other person before he or she can do it.
put the blame before they can put it on you.
But I guess sometimes we are genuinely confused as well. Not surprising, as quite often we see that we have very few role models to emulate.
Right.
So that we can learn where assertiveness stops and aggression begins.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you on that. Just look around in your own life. How many people do you see who can maintain that sense of equanimity and calm and poise and manage this balance pretty well? Unfortunately, not many.
Right. So it's an interesting point, Suresh.
Yeah.
Do you think even our individual personality type or ego has a role in making us so angry?
Interesting point. In fact, personality clashes can also trigger conflicts and anger. And very often, I see that as a lack of awareness of differing personality types and dimensions could also lead to escalation of anger, because what's happening is, if I don't understand where you're coming from, then it is like banging your head against the wall. On the other hand, when I'm able to see the full picture behind the person's behavioral traits, I may find it easier to adapt and avoid getting angry and frustrated. Don't you think so?
Right. So it again comes back to the self-awareness or even social awareness.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it may also help me address the issue better with constructive conflict management approaches. And definitely, self-awareness and social awareness, as you mentioned, are both seen as pillars of emotional intelligence. The other point that you mentioned about ego. Well, uncontrolled warring egos are also a cause for anger in many relationships. Here again, a better understanding of the situation and recognition of differing personality types and dimensions, differences in values, beliefs, ideologies, priorities, will all help us to cope, adapt, and deal with the situation effectively. After all, these warring egos aren't conjured up in thin air.
Right.
And are we spending enough time and energy to understand the underlying layers beneath what is visible as ego clashes?